Hello and welcome to the Citizen Watchdog webinar series. I'm Mary Ellen Beatty, Director of the Citizen Watchdog program, and we want to welcome you to the Citizen Watchdog webinar series today. Well, today is the first of a full week of webinars, and we certainly hope that you'll join us for all 5 days. But right now we're talking about breaking into journalism. What does it take to be a successful writer, and how do you get there? Well, joining us today to help answer some of those questions is a seasoned journalist himself, Matt Lewis of the Daily Caller. Matt's writings include political analysis, cultural commentary, as well as original reporting. You may even recognize Matt from some of his appearances on Fox News, ABC's Nightline, and various other news programs as well. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. We just want to welcome you to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And before we get started, I want to jump right in. We just wanted to remind everybody that today's program is live, and you can submit questions in real time. You can email those questions to me, to my email address. That's maryellen.beatty@franklincenterhq.org. I think that'll pop up on the screen in just a minute here. So we'll take your questions all throughout the program. But Matt, why don't you first kind of begin by telling us a little bit about your background, how you first got into journalism.
Well, actually, I thought I was going to be, I loved politics, but I thought I was cut out to be a political operative.
Oh, okay.
And that's a little bit different. A lot of people who go into journalism know that I want to be a journalist. Mm-hmm. And I knew I loved politics. But as I got deeper and deeper into it, I saw that I also, aside from loving politics, I kind of have this a little, maybe like artistic side to me that doesn't always mesh well in the trenches in a campaign world. And so I sort of discovered, to my surprise, and it was a process of discovery, that although I love politics, it was writing around politics that would allow me to be sort of in the game, but also do it from a little bit of a different perspective.
Wonderful. So was it the writing part that really hooked you in, or maybe the commentary?
So I think it was actually probably originally being a little turned off to the political operative world. Which is, when I first got involved in politics, it was kind of romantic and quixotic, and it was about ideas. And but then, as I got sort of more involved in it at a more professional level, it became about filling out spreadsheets and how many doors were knocked on and how many phone calls were made. And that wasn't what motivated me. That wasn't the sort of romantic, revolutionary stuff that I liked. So I just happened to be lucky because around the time that this awakening happened for me, the new media blossomed. So, if I had tried to break into journalism even 10, 20 years ago, I would have walked into the Washington Post and said, I want to be the next George Will, and they would have laughed in my face. But because the new media was coming along, and I started blogging in like 2003, 2004, which wasn't that long ago, but also seems like an eternity ago when blogging was first sort of becoming a big thing. It was just the right opportunity for me to do what I love, to talk about politics, to still have a voice, but to do it from a different perspective.
Now, I think there are probably a lot of citizens watching today who say, yeah, I definitely have an interest in politics and I enjoy writing. You had mentioned a creative side, that you said you kind of had this creative artistic side. What are other qualities that you think maybe it takes to be a good journalist?
Well, I think a couple. One is just curiosity. Another, I think, is, for me at least, it's a desire to teach. We're sitting right now taping in the Leadership Institute, and I worked at the Leadership Institute for about 4 years, and it's a nonprofit training organization that trains people how to go on TV even. They do an effective TV techniques workshop. And so I had sort of in my soul this love for teaching people. And a lot of what I do in journalism is to actually teach. So for example, I wrote a piece about Ronald Reagan. Sometimes liberals will say, Reagan raised taxes 11 times. And I wrote a piece outlining, well, that's technically true, but here's why, and sort of explaining and teaching. So a lot of what I do is that. I do think that the big key to journalism, though, that I've found to be successful, you have to be curious, a love for teaching helps, but it's also not quitting. Trust me, there have been many times when things haven't gone well for me that I could have quit and probably should have quit, but I didn't. I just kept doing it every day. And that's sort of how, one of the stories of how I got involved. When I first made that segue into journalism, Human Events Online had just relaunched their website, and they invited folks who didn't work there, other people around, to blog on their blog. And at first there were like 10 of us, 10 or 15 of us who were blogging on this Human Events website. And then after about a month, I was the only one still doing it. I mean, there were people who worked at Human Events who were doing it, Rob Bluey, Amanda Carpenter, who were professional journalists who worked there. But of all the people who were kind of like volunteer people doing it for free, and by the way, if you want to break into journalism, being willing to do it for free is a big piece of advice.
You got to start somewhere.
But you've also got to keep going and don't quit. I think Woody Allen said 90% of life is just showing up. I've seen so many people who arrive on the scene, make a big splash, and then just sort of fade away. Just not giving up is a big key.
Yeah, persistence is huge. I mean, some of the best investigative stories that we know, Watergate and others, came because there were one or two reporters who refused to give up, really sunk their teeth in and continued to pursue the story. I also liked what you said about training, and obviously at the Franklin Center we do a bit of training as well with our Citizen Watchdog program, trying to teach people investigative reporting, a little bit of social media and opposition research, things like that. So there's something to be said for taking an issue and that could be very complex. Maybe you're explaining a piece of legislation, or you're trying to explain how a special order or something would work in Congress, and that can be very difficult. And being able to break that down easily for the public to understand. Do you have any maybe recommendations or suggestions how to take a complex issue and break it down?
So I think, and you're exactly right, one of my favorite pieces that I wrote within the past year or so was is what they call a listicle. So, and by the way, if you want to get web traffic, if you want people to link to you, lists really work. For some reason, people are more likely to click on 5 reasons Romney's going to win the debate, or
the top
whatever.
10.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think it was 5 Bush and Clinton era policies that created the Great Recession.
Oh, okay.
And I went through and listed, and it's interesting because I think Bush and Clinton, be bipartisan or nonpartisan here, there were both things that happened during their administrations that helped cause the Great Recession. And I went through and I listed them. And I learned in the process. I had to actually do some learning. I had to interview people who were experts who knew more about it than I do. Internet research.
And that can be intimidating.
It can be. And then I had to condense a lot of information into these 5 bullet points, which could be actually easily read and that you would actually expect people to read. So part of it is to do that. Then you have to have a broadcasting mechanism. How do you actually get people to read it? And I find that Twitter, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but having tweeting that story out will drive traffic to it, so that people actually read it once you write it.
Now, in talking to experts, did you kind of develop your own Rolodex of maybe experts on a topic, or how did you sort of develop sources?
Absolutely, I think developing sources is very key. Whether you're a blogger who lives wherever, or whether you're a journalist in New York or DC, having good sources are very important, and you have to cultivate them. And really, there are several categories. So if you're going to cover elections, you need to know people in South Carolina or Iowa, right? If you're going to cover, policy, you have to have a couple people who know about healthcare to talk to, a couple people who know about foreign policy. So this takes time to develop this Rolodex, and a lot of times it's reaching out to people. Then there's also the thing that's not a source, but it's the bouncing ideas off of people. So I'll give you an example. For this piece that I did on the Bush-Clinton era policies, I had a couple people that before I hit publish, I said, hey, will you look at this and tell me that I'm not an idiot, that I'm going to look stupid, because you always have to protect your credibility.
You need that second pair of eyes.
And as a journalist, I mean, you're somewhat of a generalist too, right? I mean, there are people who focus solely on the economy, but I'm not an economist. I mean, I dabble in the economy, but I try to get it right. So one of the people I bounced it off of was Jim Pethokoukis, who's a very smart guy who works at the Free Enterprise Institute. Enterprise, help me out here. AEI, American Enterprise Institute. Jim Pethokoukis, I don't think I quoted him in the story even, but I just had him, he was just someone who looked at it and maybe said, hey, go read this piece or read this book as I was putting it together. So it's very important to have people around you that you can bounce ideas off of, as well as sources that you can actually quote on the record.
Or maybe even sometimes, if a citizen makes an open records request, for example, knowing that, if they get back pages and pages of data, that they don't have to maybe analyze that all on their own. They can reach out to a financial expert. They can reach out to someone who might be a little bit more knowledgeable on the subject.
Right, and there are organizations that help, especially ideological-based organizations that would help facilitate this. So, I mean, like, if you called the Heritage Foundation and you said, hey, I think I have a story, do you have someone who's an expert in whatever, whether it's Heritage Foundation or American Enterprise Institute, whatever, a lot of these think tanks can help, sort of put you in touch with experts. That's what they do, and people don't take advantage of it as much as they could.
Yeah, so important to build that network and have writers you can reach out to and say, hey, can you just take that second look at my final story?
Because credibility is so important. I mean, if everybody makes mistakes, but it's very important that if people read you, they know they can trust that what you've written is true and accurate. And whether you're a blogger or a paid reporter, it's still important that you get facts right. And so having other people that can help you do that is important.
Great. Now, Mac, did you study journalism in college, or what do you think that citizens need to go to journalism school in order to be successful?
I did not, and I don't. No, because I didn't know that. I was a political science major, but I didn't know that I wanted to go into journalism. I did work for 4 years at the Leadership Institute, so I, was sort of privy to going to all those training, courses, and whether it's your organization, whatever, avail yourself of that. Go to seminars, do webinars, learn as much as you can from others, so that you don't have to. Mentors and mistakes are the two ways that we learn. And it's better to have the mentors and to learn, whether it's reading or whatever. But I don't think journalism school is key. And what happened to me was, after I started blogging at Human Events, I got hired. I worked at townhall.com for a couple years, which was a great opportunity, and then I got hired to go work at AOL's Politics Daily. And that was a great experience for me, because I was around all the people that I worked for were seasoned journalists. I mean, you called me a seasoned journalist earlier because I've got some gray hair here. But the truth is, I mean, these were people who were maybe 50 years old, who had worked for 20 or 30 years at the New York Times or Newsweek, more sort of establishment traditional outlets. And although I'm a big fan of the new media, there is something to be said. So the 2 years I spent at Politics Daily working with some great editors helped me sort of hone my skills as a writer and learn. So rather than going to journalism school, that was my journalism school. What I would advise is really, I think, there's really two tracks here from what we're talking about. If you're a young person, especially, who wants to be a paid professional journalist, you still don't need to go to journalism school. If you do, fine. But I would actually recommend instead get a degree in international relations, get a degree in economics. You can always learn to write. And by the way, you have to learn to write. You have to be a good writer. But you can learn that later. But having an expertise and, be a China expert, be an economic, having that will set you apart from the competition and give you an area of expertise that I don't have. Like, for example, when I wrote that story, if I had 4 years of studying economics, I wouldn't have had to rely on Jim Pethokoukis as much. Now, the other track, I think, are citizen journalists, people out there who really nowadays can make a huge difference. They don't want to move to Washington or New York and be a paid journalist, but they're journalists sort of on their own terms. I don't think they need journalism school either, but they do need to be good writers and to get their facts right.
Yeah, definitely. You had mentioned earlier about social media and kind of how it made it easier for you to break into journalism now with social media and Twitter and blogs. How do you think now someone could break in using social media? How should they use that in their toolbox, I guess, to help them in being a citizen journalist?
I think they have an amazing opportunity to become successful from their bedroom, living room, without moving away, and the way to do it is simply to start. Anybody nowadays can start a professional-looking blog or website. You can start one at WordPress that looks pretty good, and start writing good things, doing good reporting. It can be in your local community, where, by the way, is a great place to start, and not a lot of good coverage in local communities. So there's a hunger for it. And you can begin, I would say begin following people who are journalists. And one of the things that I see that happens a lot is citizens who are holding the mainstream media accountable and helping drive the media narrative by virtue of their Twitter feed. And I'll give you an example of how I did it, but anybody could have done this. About 9 months ago, there was a Reuters story about Marco Rubio. And it came out, I mean, keep in mind, Rubio could have been the vice presidential pick this time. A lot of people thought he should have been, although Ryan's probably done a pretty darn good job. But there was this Reuters piece, and of course Reuters is highly respected. There was this Reuters piece about Marco Rubio, and I found 7 errors in it.
Oh my.
And I wrote about it. I saw it almost as soon as it came out. And I wrote about it, and because of my reporting, Reuters issued 5 retractions. Unbelievable.
Wow.
5 retractions to one story. But some of the things they had wrong were very substantive. Some of them were so provably false, such as they said that he voted against confirming Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court. Rubio wasn't even in the Senate when her confirmation hearings. So that was pretty easy to discover. And I got the retraction, but it didn't have to be me. That could have been somebody, a blogger anywhere. And we've seen many stories. If you think about some of the biggest stories that have happened in the past couple of news cycles, think about the biggest gaffe in 2008 that Obama made, right? It was the line that we're still talking about today about clinging to guns and was it religion?
And religion,
that was
folks in the Midwest.
That was a woman who is not a paid blogger who was part of the, I think it's called On the Bus for the Huffington Post. So she was kind of a citizen journalist who went to a fundraiser, recorded that, got it to the Huffington Post, and they blew it up. So it is amazing what citizen journalists can do nowadays. You have, if you have like an iPhone, I mean, you basically have a TV studio, a megaphone, a printing press. I mean, you have stuff that activists and journalists in the old days would have had to, could have never dreamed of.
And just using your video application, for example, on an iPhone or a BlackBerry, you don't need professional video editing software. You don't have to spend a lot of money. A lot of videos that have gone viral, were shaky or weren't of the best quality, but the impact was there because the story was told visually.
Absolutely. In some cases, it adds to the ambiance that it's not too slick.
And I think we're even seeing in this year's election the power of video and visuals. With advertising and other things, that writing makes a big impact, but when you accompany it with something visual, whether it be a graphic or maybe a map that explains something or a video, it's even that more impactful.
It's so important. The other thing I would say is, for some reason, I have this ability, and I love long-form journalism, but let's be honest, a lot of people out there have short attention spans.
Very true.
I think we, in general, do as a society. And for some reason, I have this ability to kind of take things and make them kind of like 300 words into a blog post that explains it. And I think that's a really important skill to develop, is how to take things that are complex or nuanced and make it a sort of short blog post. And you can accompany that with video or other images and really make something that you can then tweet out, put on Facebook, and it'll go viral.
And I loved what you said earlier about getting involved locally.
Yeah.
So many bloggers or citizens, when they first start out, they want to start writing about, the White House, and they want to start writing about campaign 2012, what's happening. But there are already so many paid journalists, I think, who are already covering those issues. But when you start covering local issues, you can have so much more impact because nobody knows your own community like you do, right? Folks who've been living in the same community for 10 years, they know the issues that are important. And so I think sometimes getting involved and writing on local issues can help you have more influence.
Absolutely. And again, I think I would sort of say the 2 different tracks. I mean, if there's a young person out there whose dream is to, work at the New York Times or whatever, then they should move to New York or DC, and they should intern, at the Daily Caller or wherever. I say for young people who want to have a career in it, it's better to be a small fish in a big pond. You want to be around the professionals and be an intern or whatever. That's how you learn. That's how you network and make connections. If you're if you're a little bit older, you have a career, but you want to make a dramatic difference as a citizen journalist, then I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there are things like Patch that are attempting to do granular local coverage, but I'm telling you, you can become a major player in communities. I'm from Frederick County, Maryland, and I still follow that area. If there were somebody in Frederick, Maryland, covering the the mayor got into a fight with this county commissioner, and this is happening, doing the kind of politics, the way that we do it at the national level, covering it, in a fair way, but also, knowing the dirt, so to speak, I would still read it today. There's a great opportunity for growth, and you can become a major player. I mean, there's some people who've really done this. There's a blog in North Dakota called Say Anything that is a huge driver of political information today. In Virginia, there's Not Larry Sabato. And a lot of states now these are popping up, but these guys become power players where like state senators and attorneys general have to go kind of kowtow to them before elections. It's pretty amazing.
That Say Anything blog that you mentioned, that's Rob Port is the blogger, and when he crunched the numbers, he was finding that he's now getting more readers than some of the major newspapers in North Dakota, which is just incredible how much influence he has.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to continue to grow. Especially, and the other thing that I hope happens is, we tend to lionize these local newspapers, but a lot of them, frankly, aren't that good. A lot of them are very biased. The Fargo Forum is an incredibly biased newspaper, and in order for them to compete, because of the Say Anything blog, it might force them to do better coverage and to be a little bit more fair. So not only is it a great opportunity for Rob to become a major player in North Dakota? Whereas if he does write about national issues too, but let's say that he only wrote about national issues, then he's competing against me, he's competing against Charles Krauthammer, he's competing against everybody.
George Will, yeah.
But we can't write about North Dakota the way he can. And sometimes, every once in a while, it becomes very important, right? So right now there's a Senate race in North Dakota. Rick Berg running against Heidi Heitkamp, but it's a very close race. What if the Senate, who knows what's going to happen, but what if it comes down to a very close election? All of a sudden, people who've never even heard of North Dakota start focusing on it. Now, who's your go-to guy? Rob Port all of a sudden becomes a national spokesman to talk about it as a journalist. And so it could happen, especially if you're a writer in a place like Iowa or New Hampshire. Definitely every 4 years, you can be a pretty big deal.
And some of these local reporters are not attending enough public meetings, school board meetings, things like that, simply because they can't be everywhere. They have a crunch for time, they're on deadline, they might just take a quote from a press release.
And papers are firing people, so there are fewer people
to cover. They're cutting back,
yeah.
Exactly. It's not always the reporter's fault. Sometimes it's just that there's cutbacks and they have to make do with what they have. But that provides an opportunity for citizens.
Tremendous opportunity.
If you make it your goal to go to, let's say every school board meeting, in the next 6 months and do extensive coverage of that, that's an opportunity of a niche that's not being filled probably by your local paper, or maybe it's being filled on a much smaller scale.
And there are a couple things that you can do with it. One is you can parlay that into writing. So you can start off and make a name for yourself writing about local stuff and develop a good reputation and build an audience, and then parlay that into writing about state issues or federal issues or whatever. Or you could actually just say, we're going to flip the script and we're going to be about local issues and do it better than anybody, because there's no way somebody sitting in Washington, D.C. can cover Minot, North Dakota the way I can. And so that's a smart move. It's sort of a good business decision as well as something that's helpful for democracy.
So continuing on that, making a name for yourself, what advice do you have for citizens on kind of building your personal brand? If you want to identify yourself as, an influencer in the community, or just someone who has a command of the topic, where do you even start to kind of develop your personal brand?
Well, I think brand management is important for everybody, and I think that, the first thing is credibility. And so that's being somebody who's trusted. Okay. Doesn't mean you don't have a point of view, but it means that you're not a hack, you're not a liar.
Committed to accuracy.
Yes, and so I think that's very important. Credibility, having a professional, serious reputation is important. But I also think it's also putting time into it. I advise people, especially people who want to go into journalism, to spend 50, and this sounds ridiculous, but they say that politicians who want to be successful, good or bad, they should spend 50% of their time raising money. I say that people who want to be successful in journalism should spend about 50% of their time on their brand and 50% of their time writing. I see a lot of writers who spend 100% of their time on their writing, and they turn out great copy that nobody reads. Okay. They should be spending more time building a Twitter following, building a community, engaging with a community on social media, doing TV, radio interviews, doing what some Rick Klein from ABC calls it being platform agnostic, which means you're not just a writer anymore. If you want to be a successful journalist, you really today, it's not enough to say, I'm a writer, I don't do that other stuff, we have a PR department. No. You have to be your own publicist, your own tech expert, your own writer, your own fact checker, your own TV booker. I mean, all of these things. The old days of working at a company that took care of you for 50 years and then you retire with a gold watch are gone. Even if you're lucky enough to get paid to write today, every sort of journalistic job I've had has lasted about 2 years. And hopefully this one will be, will be different. But so you have to have what's called portable equity, which means yes, you care about your company, yes, you are loyal to your company, yes, you do good work for them, but you have also built an audience for yourself. And so I am a marketable commodity, partly because I write things that people want to read, but also partly because I have X number of Twitter followers, because I can go on TV and do other things, because I've developed a little bit of a name for myself. And so young writers, young journalists have to be cognizant of that. They have to do it. And then a final story, and then I'll move on. But many, many, many years ago, when I was living in Frederick County, Maryland, I played in a rock band. Believe it or not. And
were you the singer, the bass player? Give us a little more detail.
I played guitar.
Okay.
A little, not a great singer. But one of the things that I learned, I went into it thinking that what happens is if you can get booked at a really good bar or club, that you would do that. You'd be a good band. They would book you at a really big, nice, good bar or club, and then you would get all these fans, and you'd be a rock star. What I learned is that's not how it works. The bars won't book you unless you have a huge following. So you go to the owner of the Old Town Tavern in Frederick, Maryland, and say, look, I can bring 500 people in here, a lot of girls, women, bring them in. You get the women, the men will follow usually in the bar scene, and you'll sell a lot of Bud Lights, okay? Doesn't sound wholesome to our viewers at home, but that's how it works. If I bring people, being a good musician is really secondary. Do you have a following? And the sad truth is, in journalism today, if you have a big following on your own, it's much easier to get hired. And really that's something you have to do on your own. And it's in a way it's conservative though, it's entrepreneurial. You're not depending on someone else to do it for you. You are an entrepreneur, you are going to build this thing yourself, this brand. And that's my advice to young people who want to be professional journalists. Yes, it's important to go to a good outlet that's respected, and yes, you want to do good work for them and be loyal to them. But guess what? They could fold tomorrow. You have to build a following that will make you appealing and relevant, where you might decide to open up just matklewis.com. And just do it yourself and run ads on that site.
Do you own that URL?
I'm
going to quick run and buy it right now.
I do have it. I don't think it doesn't get a ton of traffic. But I don't try to drive traffic there. Yeah. But you could even do it on your own. I mean, there is something sort of entrepreneurial about this. You don't necessarily even need to get hired by anybody.
Well, and it's almost that it's not enough anymore just to write a lot of stories. Let's say you're posting 5 times a day. The question becomes, how many people are reading your stories? Right. How many people have you reached? And in fact, a lot of newsrooms have switched to those measurables where it's no longer about, okay, well, you need to write X number of stories, per week. Now it's, well, how many viewers did you have? How many comments were on your story? So definitely a shift in journalism in the way that editors are thinking.
Part of your job as a writer, and I mean, there are old-time journalists who would hate this and lament this and think it's unethical. But the truth is, I mean, whether you're at the Daily Caller where I am, or you're at the Washington Post, you have got to be on Twitter. You've got to be engaging your community. building a community, and driving people to the site to read your stuff and, yes, generate page views and ad impressions. It's a business. At the end of the day, it's a business.
So do you have any advice then, maybe like step by step, if there was maybe a writer or a blogger out there who already has a blog and they're writing regularly, but they're looking to kind of maximize their impact online, to get a following on Twitter, what are maybe some just key steps that they can do in order to build their following online?
I think that part of it, and it's everybody's looking for the silver bullet, but I think right now, this could change in a couple of years, but right now I think Twitter is the most important social media. That's my take. I think you can also make a huge difference. You could make, as an activist and even a journalist, you could make a huge difference on Twitter without writing. I would say the number one most important thing you can do is to be on Twitter, grow your following. How do you do that? Given it shall be given unto you, right? Follow other people and they will follow you. Retweet other people and they will retweet you. Follow and engage in conversation with people who you want in your life, people who you want as mentors or who you want to get to know you. And so I see people like Jake Tapper, from ABC News interacting with conservative bloggers. That's good. And over time you can develop a relationship with people like him, and then he'll retweet you if you have something really good. So build the Twitter community, and it takes time, right? What you don't want to do is use Twitter just to promote your stories. You write a piece, tweet out a link. Write a piece, tweet out a link. That doesn't work. You have to engage other people, help promote other people, engage them in conversation. Don't be a troll. Don't just be negative and attack people. But you have to put in time. See, the thing with Twitter, and I think all social media, you actually have to spend time there and be part of the community. You can't fake it. You can't have like this thing that automatically tweets every time you post this. You can do that, but it's not going to work. Yeah. You need to really be part of the community, and anybody can do it. That's the beauty of it. Anybody can make this happen.
And what is your Twitter handle, Matt, for those who are live tweeting our?
I'm at Matt K. Lewis, and I do this, and it's a double-edged sword, because being accessible on Twitter is great for me, except for when I anger people and they attack me on Twitter, and that happens too. And that's sort of just part of the business we're in. But it's great because we can hold others accountable. I mean, it used to be in the old days, if you were a writer at the Fargo Forum and you wrote something that was wrong or that people didn't like, the only thing they could do was write you a letter to the editor. And you could essentially ignore that. You didn't even have to publish it if the editor didn't want to, or whoever. Now, if you're on Twitter and you're active on Twitter, they can find you very easily and they can give you a piece of their mind, and they will do that. Publicly. And they can write comments, and they can write their own blog post. And sometimes it's hurtful and demeaning, and sometimes it's instructive. I've had people tell me, hey, you spelled this word wrong, and I'm able to fix it. And it's sort of like telling somebody they've got broccoli in their teeth. You're doing them a favor when you do that. You want someone to tell you that.
Great. Yeah. Well, we do have a few questions submitted here from citizens, and I just want to remind everyone that you can submit questions in real time. You can either email them to me at maryellen.beatty@franklincenterhq.org, and that was popped up on the screen a little bit ago, or you can just interact right online. So the question we have is, what is the greatest misconception surrounding a journalism career that young aspiring journalists hold?
I think that it's glamorous. Everybody TV studios are a classic example, right? Everybody who watches TV thinks that the studios are glamorous, and mostly they're shabby. There is 30 Rock in New York is quite nice, but by and large, it's not as nice as it looks on TV, and that's sort of like a microcosm for it. I mean, being successful in journalism, let me use the rock band analogy once again.
Okay.
People who walk in and see you on stage, that's what they remember. They don't see the hours of rehearsal time. They don't see the fight with your girlfriend because she doesn't, she wanted to go watch a movie that night. They don't see, if you don't have roadies, that you load up the van and the drum kit. They don't see that as soon as the night ends at 2 in the morning you're now loading. Other people are having a beer, talking. You're now loading up equipment or trying to get a bar owner to actually pay you because they never want to. Real life is messy, and journalism is the same way. People, they see you on TV, they think it's a glamorous lifestyle, but it's tough work, and for every, there's a reason why a lot of people don't make it, and there's rejection, there's all sorts of bad things. So you have to be tough and resilient. But I think that's the biggest misconception, that it's going to be, like an 80s movie montage. If you watch 80s movies, like there's a da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and all of a sudden someone gets into journalism and there'll be like that music, that real horrible 80s music playing, and the next thing you know, they're like on stage. On stage. Yeah. But in real life, it's not a Rocky-esque montage, a training montage. It's a lot of rejection. Mostly.
No, you're right. I like that. That it's journalism can be glamorous, particularly broadcast journalism, or us at the studio right now. But there's a lot of hard work that goes into it.
There's a lot of getting up early as well that people don't see. Like I'll give you Morning Joe. The show starts at 6 a.m. Wow. How do you they must get up at 4 a.m. every morning to do it. I mean, Willie Geist, he doesn't do it anymore, but he used to do that show way too early at 5:30 a.m. You've got to get up, take a shower, put on makeup, get to the studio. I mean, all that stuff. Now, if you're getting up at 4 a.m., what kind of life do you have? You
got to go to bed at 7 o'clock. Yeah. Have your dinner at 4 o'clock. Yeah,
and then the worst part is a lot of times you're talking about the debate that started at 9 o'clock at night the night before. So you're either talking about something you didn't see, or you're staying up till midnight and getting up at 4. Which is rough.
Yeah, this is a noon Eastern Standard Time webinar, and that was as early as I could get us here to the studio. But okay, well, we do have just a few more questions from citizens, so I do want to get to those before we end. This is a fun one. Who is the most interesting person that you have had to interview or write about in your career?
Wow. Well, the great thing about journalism is you get to talk to really interesting people.
Yeah, definitely.
And you get to meet. There's an excuse to meet almost anybody that you want to meet. I would say that it's a little bit different, but when I worked at townhall.com, I was, I think, one of the first, it was me and another guy named Soren Dayton. I believe we were the first bloggers ever to write on the Straight Talk Express with John McCain, who would go on to be the Republican nominee. And we did it, I think, in March of '07. And so, John McCain, a lot of people like him or not, is a fascinating guy. I mean, I think I've probably met more colorful, weird people, but
they make the better stories sometimes.
But to be a blogger writing on the Straight Talk Express with John McCain as he is in his march to become the Republican nominee for president was really cool. I'm the son of a prison guard. I went to college in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and the idea that I would be, with what could have been the President of the United States, asking him questions was pretty cool. In New Hampshire, by the way.
Okay.
It was pretty cool.
What's coming up? Do you have any big stories you're working on, or maybe just election coverage, or what are you working on currently?
So that's the thing. I try to post around 3 to 5 blog posts a day at the Daily Caller. I also recently started writing a weekly column for The Week magazine, and then there's just tweeting stuff all the time. So people a lot of times will ask me like, what do you have? What are you working on? And rarely do I have like a long-term story that I've been spending weeks working on. A lot of it is, what am I gonna, what have you done for me lately? So right now, very focused on the debate tonight. I mean, I think it's very clear that debates are the big story of this election. The debates are the reason that Mitt Romney became the Republican nominee. I think it's hard to dispute the fact that Romney's performance in the first debate dramatically shifted the race and gave him a chance. And this is the last debate. So if you're not focused on the debate, you're an idiot. This is where you've got to be focused on that tonight. I wrote a piece, a little bit of a controversial title that some have taken umbrage with, called "For Dead and Ohio," which is my preview of what I think the election's about and what the debate's about tonight. So you can read that at the Daily Caller. But I think all eyes are on Boca Raton, Florida, and the last presidential debate of this cycle.
And if you're, a citizen looking to get more involved in social media, like we mentioned, the debate is a great opportunity to get involved in social media. If you hop on Twitter, and follow a few of the different debate hashtags, you'll be able to certainly be able to connect and hear opinions from not only, great journalists like Matt Lewis, but there are a lot of other prominent public figures who will have commentary on Twitter about the debate. So I think it's kind of exciting to get that by-the-minute update from some really prominent people. We have one more question here, and then I think we're going to wrap it up on this lunch break. But is there a network of female journalists that young aspiring female journalists can hook into?
So good question. The answer, honestly, I don't know because I'm not a female, so I wouldn't know. But there are great female journalists out there that I really recommend following, and one of them is Shira Tuplitz at Roll Call, who's a great journalist, and I would recommend following her. Kirsten Powers at the Daily Beast and also Fox News is terrific, and she does some great coverage on the whole Benghazi thing. But Twitter is a great way to network with them, and I think that it is important. There are certain challenges, and I would say pros and cons to being a female journalist. I think that there is still, unfortunately, on Capitol Hill, a little bit of a good old boys club. It doesn't happen so much on the trail of covering campaign politics, but on Capitol Hill, that still exists. So that's a special challenge. On the other hand, I think that as more and more media outlets hope to diversify, being a female journalist and breaking in, it's not a bad thing to be. And also, I think that as a conservative as well, because the traditional stereotype is the old white guy as conservative. So anything that breaks that stereotype can be successful and can be helpful. But definitely, I would say my advice is follow Shira Tuplitz from Roll Call, follow Kirsten Powers, get to know some of these prominent female journalists who are very good, and network with them. And I would be surprised if you were to reach out to them, especially if you're a young person. I would be very surprised if they wouldn't be interested in having coffee with you and helping you out.
That's great. And obviously there's been a lot of focus on women during this election. The war on women, supposedly, we've heard a lot about. So I think there's a good opportunity for female journalists to establish a voice and a writing career if they look to that. I would recommend two things: Smart Girl Politics. Again, that's Smart Girl Politics. A great group. They also take in female contributors and writers, so that's a good one. Maybe even Independent Women's Forum. I know they've got a lot of female experts who would probably be good people to follow as well. So
absolutely.
Those are my recommendations. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. I hope everybody will find him on Twitter and will take his advice and watch tonight's debate. Again, this is a full week of webinars, all 5 days. So tomorrow, if you want to join us back at noon, we've got, speaking of wonderful women, Kate Obenshane, who recently wrote her new book, Divisive Politics, or it's Divider in Chief, The Fraud of Hope and Change. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about divisive politics in the Obama administration, and we hope that you will all be back tomorrow at noon Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you then. Thank you so much.